Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, August the 30th, 2023. Tomorrow there is a full moon. In fact, depending on where you are, this evening there's a full moon. And so I want to look at that full moon in a general sense, just to see how it might affect the world. I also want to look at the horoscope of the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We don't have a time of birth for him, but I haven't looked at his chart before, so I thought it might be interesting. Maybe he's not as exciting as some of the American politicians I've recently been looking at, but still, he's Prime Minister of an important country. He is not the head of state of Britain. Joe Biden is the head of state of the US, and so I'm wondering, does Rishi Sunak's chart represent the UK in the same way I believe that Joe Biden's chart represents the US? I suspect the answer to that question is no. The head of state in the UK is obviously Charles III. So the Prime Minister doesn't have that role. So maybe his horoscope isn't quite so connected to the nation as the US president's is. So, I'm not saying that for sure, but I'm just pondering that connection. Anyway, before I look at full moons and Rishi Sunak, I want to look at the astrology for today, which is Wednesday, August the 30th, 2023. So let's see what's going on. There we go. There is Rishi Sunak on the top right, and I'll be talking about him soon. But first, let's get into the astrology for today. You can see on this chart set for New York that the moon has gone into Pisces. Well, the moon actually goes into Pisces at 2:56 at 2:56 in the afternoon, 2:56 p.m. In London. So if you're in Western Europe, you're going to feel the moon going into Pisces sort of later in the day, sort of mid-afternoon. If you're in Asia, it's going to be later. If you're in Far East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it's going to be right at the end of the day, and it's probably not really going to be an issue. Indeed, it's probably going to be tomorrow morning, and so that moon in Pisces may not really affect you. Also, there is a moon conjunct Saturn, which I do talk about. I do talk a lot about this conjunction between the moon and Saturn, and it's certainly building up. But London time, that moon conjunct Saturn is exact at 8:33 p.m. So if the exact aspect in London is in the evening, and even later if you're in sort of Eastern Europe, Asia, and certainly not an issue if you're in Australia or New Zealand. However, if you're in the United States, for example, if you're in West Coast, Los Angeles, Seattle, you're going to get that Moon-Saturn conjunction just after noon, about 12:33 p.m. So for half of the day, you're going to have to deal with that Moon-Saturn conjunction. Now, the full moon, I mentioned that there's a full moon tomorrow. Well, if you are in the Americas, you've got a full moon this evening. That's because the full moon in London is at 2:36 in the morning tomorrow. So that means in the West Coast, that full moon is going to be just after 6 p.m. today, 6:36 p.m. today in New York, 9:36 p.m. So yes, so in the Americas, that full moon is today. It is this evening. So that gives you an idea about the big aspects. I think certainly if you're in the Americas, probably the most important aspect is the moon conjunct Saturn, which is also hitting the full, which is kind of also hitting the full moon. If you're in Europe, particularly Asia, Australasia, it's probably not quite such a dramatic day. As far as other things going on, you'll notice that the Sun continues to be on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So Venus-Mars midpoint, Sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint is good for attracting people. It's a very charismatic midpoint. It's midpoint combination, Sun on the Venus-Mars. It also gives sex appeal. I talked about the Sun on the Venus-Mars yesterday, and it's still around today. So that's something to consider. So if you're trying to attract people, then you might have some luck. So that's the Sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint. But although the Sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint, it's good for relationships, you have to balance it with the fact that Uranus is conjunct the Venus-Saturn midpoint. So there is Uranus, there is Saturn, there is Venus, and so Uranus is conjunct the Venus-Saturn midpoint. And in terms of relationships, that's not so good. Venus-Saturn is about, it can be about repressed feeling. Venus-Saturn can be about having the wrong attitudes to relationships and to sex and things like that. And so Uranus on the Venus-Saturn midpoint can be about sort of strange behavior. So if you're at the beginning of a relationship and you don't really know the person you're in a relationship with, which would not, of course, be an ideal situation. I mean, I suppose you should know people, if you're intimately involved with someone. But if you're, you've got to be prepared for a surprise. Emotions might get a bit twisted with Uranus on the Venus-Saturn midpoint. When you get twisted emotions, passion can turn to destruction, love can turn to hatred, all of that kind of stuff. So be careful. So if you're in a relationship which is at all messy, particularly, emotionally messy, then I think with that Uranus on the Venus-Saturn midpoint, then maybe you should perhaps consider steering clear of that relationship. Now, as far as the signs are concerned, as always, I did my forecasts for the 12 signs of the zodiac. And these are my forecasts for today, which is Wednesday, August the 30th, 2023. Aries, you certainly have the capacity to bring people together and to make new connections, even if the external conditions aren't perfect. I suppose it's your innate dynamism that makes a difference. Yet you mustn't try to do too much, and perhaps the most you can do is offer an opportunity, and not everyone will be interested in this opportunity. Taurus, there are things that you definitely want, and I'm not talking about money and success and status. It's more about living a particular life where your hopes and wishes are answered. But someone or something seems to be in the way. Rather than get annoyed, you need to understand the situation and fine-tune your general approach. Gemini, In one sense, things are tough. It's not easy to get results, and it might seem that the best option is to give up. But if you are ready to put in the effort, it's a different story. Your drive and ambition will stand out, and soon enough you'll be making real progress. Be aware, though, of the emotional environment, but don't be overwhelmed by it. Cancer. It's important to listen, particularly when it comes to moral and philosophical issues. You have your own views, but I think some of the conclusions you have reached are fundamentally wrong. Yet, when you listen to one particular person, someone you respect, you'll have a chance to revise your approach without embarrassment. The right relationship can be great. Leo. Easy to get in, not so easy to get out. Suddenly you're committed, and extracting yourself from a commitment may be difficult. So don't volunteer for something unless you have really thought it through. Yet the Sun is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, so today you have got charisma and even sex appeal. Virgo. You have to accept that you don't hold all the cards. At least today you don't. With a Moon-Saturn conjunction in Pisces, your opposite sign, you feel that other people's personalities are weighing in on you, and the closer they are, the greater the restriction. But it's a short-term situation and not a cause for dramatic action. Libra. Today is unlikely to be very exciting. The focus is on routine events and the obligation to take full control of your immediate environment. Indeed, to find a true sense of balance, there's a lot of garbage to be cleared out. And I'm not just talking about empty food wrappers. There are ongoing situations that I think are no longer useful. Scorpio. There's an activity you have been interested in for some time, and now is a time to make a decision. Do you take the view that you have given it a go and now it's time to move on to something else? Or do you start putting large amounts of energy into it with the dedication that Scorpios are famous for? Well, you've got to look at the choice and the decision is yours. Sagittarius. Sagittarians are free spirits and they don't want to be tied to one place or one group of people. But today the moon makes a conjunction to Saturn in an important angle of your solar chart. There are obligations, probably of a domestic and family nature, that you can't really get out of. But one person's millstone is another person's anchor. Capricorn. You're the one in control, and if you don't like the way things are going, you can make the required changes. And when people get close to you, they realize how strong you are. So this gives you a certain amount of responsibility. You have to give people room to breathe and also make sure that their voice gets heard. Aquarius. You're quite sensible today. You know what's possible and you understand the importance of sticking to a budget. At the same time, you'll be good at resisting pressure. But don't be unnecessarily harsh. Your job is to support the people in your life, not make them feel self-conscious. Pisces. You want things done in a particular way, and at the moment you're quick to notice when things aren't right. I suppose it's connected with your emotional sensitivity. If you're in the Americas, then this evening you might feel the blast of the full moon. A personality clash could be brewing. So let's now move on to the I Ching. So, as always, I threw the 3 coins in the air and I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? And so I got hexagram number 8, holding together. So, in the first instance, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of get together with other people. That's going to be a big motivation, particularly in the early part of the day, for a reason. It may be because you need to cooperate on some venture. It may be because there's some external threat, something that needs to be discussed, or it may be that just things are so confusing you need to relate to other people, and this gives you a leadership position, and it's quite a heavy responsibility taking on this leadership position. And the I Ching actually wonders whether or not it's possible for you to be a true leader, for you to really take advantage of this situation where everyone is holding together and looking for someone to provide leadership. So, can you deal with it? So actually, the I Ching it suggests that you consult the oracle once again to see if you can really handle it. Now, I'm afraid I can't do that. I can't consult the oracle for all of you. Each one of you has your different path. But there is a problem. The problem is this. The problem is the third line. This line, it moves. And it gives us some information about the kind of people that we're hanging out with. So if you're trying to get something done and you're trying to get other people's help and cooperation, what kind of people are they? And the I Ching suggests that maybe they're the wrong kind of people. So if we're hanging out with the wrong people, with the wrong crowd, then we're just not going to get anything done, at best. So it may be, depending on the situation, that the people you're dealing with, working with, they may not be competent, for example. They may just not be up to the job. Their advice may not be particularly useful. Indeed, it may be useless. And that's going to create a problem, and it kind of answers the question, can you deal with it? Can you take this position of leadership? And the problem is, if other people aren't up to the job, if they're the wrong people, then probably the answer is it's probably going to be a waste of time. And this hexagram moves, because this line moves, to this one, to here. You see that line's moved, and that takes us to hexagram number 39, obstruction. And I'm afraid that just says it all. We're going to try very hard to deal with a particular problem. We're going to try to get help from people, and it's still no good. So the question is this fated? Whatever we do, are we destined to be obstructed? Obstruction doesn't mean that we're not going to get what we want, but it kind of suggests that we're not going to get what we want today. But is there anything we can do? Now, remember I said that the I Ching kind of suggested you ask the oracle again. And it may be that what is likely to happen is that you'll hang out with the wrong people. You'll get help from the wrong people. But maybe it's not for sure. Maybe if you make a special effort to mix with the right crowd, then you've got a chance. The odds are perhaps still against you, but make a special effort to choose the right company. And it could make a big difference in terms of how the day ends up. And maybe you don't have to go through that obstruction. Maybe you'll get a clear path to the achievement of whatever you want to accomplish. So that's the I Ching. What I'm going to do now is go back to the astrology, and I do quickly want to look at tomorrow's full moon because it's right upon us really, and I'm not looking at it this full moon in terms of just what happens tomorrow. It's just how it might affect us maybe for the next 2 weeks, even 4 weeks. So let's look at the full moon. So here we are. So here's the full moon. This is it. Full moon. London time. This full moon is at 2:36 a.m. Which is tomorrow on Thursday. This full moon, I think for most of us, is not actually going to be particularly powerful. It's not an eclipse. So here's the full moon. So you can see that the moon is at 7:26 Pisces. So that's quite close to the conjunction of Saturn. So I think for most of us it's quite downbeat. This full moon is going to encourage us over the next few weeks to be quite restrained, perhaps in an emotional sense. I mean, that doesn't mean to say that the emotions aren't there, but in fact, I think they probably will be there in quite a major way. But we're going to be trying our hardest to control them. So, I know people like to talk about all the wonderful things about full moons. They try to be optimistic about full moons. Love, karma, relationships, good vibes. No, I don't really feel that way about this full moon. It's just not particularly exciting. But I suppose we can, in terms of this full moon, we should perhaps consider how it affects different places. Now, this full moon is set for London. And set for London, you can see that Mars is conjunct the IC, and we've got Pluto on the descendant. So that's not great. I think for the UK in general, September's probably not going to be a great month. Pluto on the IC can represent enemies because this, seventh house is a sort of foreign policy house. It's about who countries have to deal with. Pluto there, maybe hidden enemies, imagined enemies, and then Mars on the IC, almost suggests an attack on the fundamental nature of what the country is. And I'm not talking about a real attack. Okay, it might be a real attack, but I'm not saying it is. It's just the roots of what it is. This country is just going to be under attack. That Mars on the IC is just not happy. Though I don't think we in Britain should. Actually, I'm not in Britain. I'm in America. But if you are in Britain, I don't think you should take it personally. If we look at the astro map for that, let's just have a look at that. So there is the line for Mars on the IC. You can see it actually goes through London, goes through Western France, goes through, I don't know, Barcelona, somewhere like that, and then goes through Africa. And this is a reminder. This Mars on the IC line, which on the full moon, which it's a reminder that what's going on in Western Africa. Niger, Niger is here. This Mars on the IC line is pretty close to Niger, and I think this full moon could really stir things up in Western Africa. I already mentioned that when looking at the precise moment that Mars went into Libra. Again, on that Mars, there you can see Mars and Neptune. So I think that's perhaps rather worrying. So you can also see that this is a place where when that full moon happens on the ascendant through, I don't know, goes through and Saturn, you can see that may affect Iran a bit. Maybe not Russia, but Iran might be affected by this full moon. I don't know, looks it goes through sort of Western Pakistan maybe. So there's a possibility that there are problems for the Iranian regime with that. But this astrocartography thing where you look at a full moon and you look at maps, it is somewhat hit and miss. Also on the full moon, I noticed that Jupiter is conjunct the midheaven in Moscow, well, pretty close to Moscow. Is that good news in Russia? I don't know. That's could be a positive for Russia, that full moon. But we can. I wouldn't bank on it. This technique, as I said, is pretty hit and miss. So that's all I wanted to say really on the full moon, except for the fact that it's not really good news for Britain, which brings me on to the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Now, I have absolutely no opinion on Rishi Sunak, absolutely none. I don't feel anything particularly negative or positive towards him. It's not like when I think of Biden, for example, where I just see red with Biden. It's not. You don't have that. I don't have those kind of issues with Rishi Sunak. So let's have a look and see what's going on with Rishi Sunak. So here is his natal chart. I do not have his time of birth. So this is his midday chart. I've set it for Southampton. He was born in Southampton, May the 12th, 1980. So for a prime minister, he's very young. He has just turned a few months ago. He turned 43. So he's a very young prime minister. His chart. In some respects, his chart is kind of a bit boring. And I kind of mean that in sort of positive sense. He's got, he's got Sun-Mercury conjunction in Taurus, and it's trine Saturn, 120 degrees from Saturn. That in an Earth sign, Saturn in Virgo. That's very disciplined. It's very hard-working. It's very sensible. Sun trine Saturn. It's often quite a good aspect, quite disciplined. I've got Sun. By the way, I should say I've got Sun trine Saturn, and I've never really got into that. But I'm just an exception. I think for most people, Sun trine Saturn is quite useful. But my Sun trine Saturn is in air signs. I've got Sun in Gemini trine Saturn in Aquarius. He's got Sun in Taurus trine Saturn in Virgo. That's really sensible. And he's got I know that I've said that Mercury Sun-Mercury conjunctions can be difficult because Mercury is this sort of the intellect, and it may be in its combust. It's too close to the sun, so he can't see straight. Although he's clearly a very, very clever man. very intelligent man. He doesn't seem to me to show any particular evidence of not being able to see straight. Although, of course, Britain has persisted in its obsession with Ukraine. Maybe that's where he can't see straight. Who knows? But I think perhaps what saves his Mercury is the fact it's probably in mutual reception to Venus. You see, Mercury is in Taurus, the sign of Venus, and Venus is in Gemini, the sign of Mercury. Well, it might be in Gemini. You can see his Venus is at 29 degrees 50 minutes Gemini. So if he was born later in the day, his Venus would be in Cancer. So we don't know what sign his Venus is in. I kind of have a feeling it's in Gemini. I think it has to be in Gemini. I may be wrong, but I think it's in Venus is in Gemini. So I therefore think that Venus is in mutual reception to his Mercury. He's got a conjunction between Mars and Jupiter, but in Virgo. I mean, Jupiter is not really very well placed in Virgo. I mean, that kind of makes sense. You know, Jupiter is a planet of big concept, big ideas. You know, what's your philosophy in life? But you put it in Virgo, it doesn't really work, does it? It's just you're so concerned about material details that you can never bring out a big philosophy on life. And maybe that's his problem as a politician. Jupiter in Virgo, he doesn't really he doesn't inspire. He doesn't really have a big idea. I mean, he can speak the words, but I don't think that fundamentally he has a big idea about where Britain should be going. Certainly not a big idea to inspire people. But you know, he's got Mars conjunct Jupiter. Mars-Jupiter conjunctions, there's a lot of energy there, but it's Virgo energy. So he can put a huge amount of effort into his work, and I suppose that's probably part of his reason he's so successful. You know, at school, goes to Oxford. I did what happened after that? He did get a job in a bank or something. You know, he worked hard. And he has the capacity to work hard. And I'm sure as, you know, Prime Minister, he reads his briefs and all that kind of stuff. And he's on top of the details. So that's probably how the Mars conjunct Jupiter is working. As far as how he relates to the public, I don't think. His chart doesn't suggest that he is very inspirational. He doesn't have any planets in water signs, except if you count the generational planet Uranus in Scorpio. So lack of water can sometimes mean that you're dealing with someone who doesn't really understand the currents going on in society. He can't really feel it. Maybe, I mean, that's possible. He just can't really feel, what's going on, and I think that may become more of an issue as he approaches an election. But I think there has to be an election in Britain by the end of next year. There has to be an election. So when it comes to the election, there's plenty of scope for him to misfire. Now, Tony Blair was a Taurus. Whatever you think of him, he was a very successful politician. He didn't have any water in his chart, except I think he had Pluto in Cancer, I think. Now, he was a very successful campaigner. He was able to inspire people. He had quite a bit of fire in his chart, although he was a Taurus. I think he had Mercury and Venus in fire signs. So maybe that that sort of compensated to an extent. But with Rishi Sunak, he's just got Moon in Aries. Is that enough to inspire people? Maybe not. So there could be an issue there. I mean, in terms of connecting with the public, I suppose the best you can say is that he has Venus on the Aries point. So regardless of whether he's got Venus in Gemini or Cancer, it's very close to 0 degrees Cancer. And so if you have Venus if you do have Venus on the Aries point, or square the Aries point, I mean that's Cancer square the Aries point, and you're into politics and you're a politician, then that does enable you to connect with your voters, with the populace. In general, people are going to like you. So he has that advantage, and maybe maybe this Venus on the Aries point has already helped him, get the support he needs to become prime minister. It must have been hard work. He had to become a member of parliament. He had to get into cabinet. It all happened really quickly for him. One thing, if you look at his career, it's just easy. And of course he married an extremely rich woman as well. Not that he was. I think his parents, they worked hard, and he went to a really good school, and his wife is extremely rich. But everything seems to have been very easy for him. He just gets into parliament, doesn't have to do much, or I'm sure he works really hard, but before you know it, he's prime minister. That's just really quick. Maybe this is connected with this trine between Saturn and the Sun. That does suggest a bit of ease in his chart. That is possible, but he's kind of a person, he gets he works hard, he immediately gets the rewards for working hard. That seems to be how it works. As far as what's going on in his life at the moment, and what's been going on in his life in the recent past, I just wanted to quickly show you his solar return. Actually, his solar return for 2022. So this was his solar return set for May the 12th, 2022. Just before he became prime minister. Well, in fact, there were 2 leadership elections because Boris Johnson resigned. Then there was the Conservative Party had an election to vote for a leader, and he put his name in the hat, and he didn't make it. Then they chose Liz Truss instead, but she only lasted 7 weeks. So it was a second leadership election, and so that was when he won the second leadership election. So he kind of got it second time. That was probably that almost seems like that was the first failure in his life, not winning the first leadership election. But he won the second one, so that's why he's prime minister. Now remember, I said that he had Venus on the Aries point. Now in this solar return set for May the 12th, 2022, Jupiter is at 019 Aries. In other words, Jupiter is on the Aries point. That's kind of lucky if you're a politician, just having a solar return when Jupiter is right on the Aries point. And Uranus is at 1513. Taurus is semi-square the Aries point. So really he had Jupiter and Uranus on the Aries point. So he's able to project the right image to the public at large, and that really must have helped him become prime minister. Jupiter Uranus, having that Jupiter Uranus semi-square. Remember, Reinhold Ebertin said that when talking about the Jupiter Uranus combination, he said it's the it's for thank the Lord aspect. So he had a lot to be grateful that it happened quickly. It was probably a big surprise when Liz Truss was won the leadership election, and then amazingly for Rishi Sunak, she only lasted 7 weeks, and after that he got what he was looking for. So I think that's kind of reflected in his solar return. Now, when you look at his second solar return, this is when I think things maybe are about to start going wrong for Rishi Sunak. So if we look at his solar return for 2023, again, I don't have a time of birth, but it's kind of worth noting that in this solar return, he has got a Sun-Uranus conjunction. Remember, this solar return is going to be operational until May the 12th of next year, May the 12th, 2024. So that Sun-Uranus conjunction, okay, that reflects the fact that he had Uranus transiting his Sun, and okay, he's survived it, but still that conjunction is baked into the solar return. And so that's the first hint. Maybe, but not everything is fine. So what we would perhaps then want to do is look at other stuff going on in his chart. So let's look at his transits at the moment. Remember, Uranus is kind of conjunct his Sun in that solar return. So Uranus is currently at around 23 Taurus, so it's just past that. So going to Rishi Sunak's natal chart, we can see that Uranus is actually right there. He's actually got his Uranus opposition Uranus. So Uranus has gone over the last few days. It's gone stationary retrograde at this point. It's gone stationary retrograde at around 23 something Taurus. So that Uranus is going to come back onto his Sun, and it's going to come back onto his Mercury. So this Sun Mercury is about to get hit. Is about to get hit by Uranus, and I think there may be some kind of shocks and surprises coming his way, something he wasn't really expecting, and I do think I do think going back to this full moon, this full moon kind of hints that not everything is right for Britain. Mars on the IC, Pluto on the descendant, that amplifies this feeling of disease here. And another thing going on with Rishi Sunak, if he has a very, very, very wide he has a very, very wide Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now, you might say, oh, that is an 18-degree orb. That's miles away. But you see, if we take secondary progressions, remember, secondary progressions, 1 day equals one year. So what is that Mars-Saturn going to be doing after he was born? Well, that Mars is going to start catching up with Saturn, and so after say, where is that Mars and Saturn? How are they going to be, say, 43 days after he was born? Because that equates to the 43rd year of his life. So if we look at his secondary progressions for right now, we can see that he has an exact Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now, theoretically, if we set his chart for noon, that Mars-Saturn conjunction is slightly separating. But we don't know when he was born. If he was born, say, at 7 in the morning, it wouldn't quite be there yet. So I think when we look at the fact that he's got this Uranus transiting his sun, and we've got this Mars-Saturn conjunction coming up, well, it's with the secondary, his secondary progressed Mars-Saturn conjunction is there. Again, things are not perhaps looking very happy. And finally, I wanted to look at the chart when he became Prime Minister. So that's when he went to Buckingham Palace and met the King. It's not like when Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, when he was sworn in a very public way, or same with Joe Biden, very publicly sworn. The public inauguration. With the British Prime Minister, I think it's actually behind closed doors. No one actually sees it. I think he goes into Buckingham Palace not as Prime Minister, and he comes out as Prime Minister. I think that's how it works. So the inauguration chart, not the inauguration chart, I don't know what it's called. It's not an inauguration. I don't know even if it's a swearing in. Is this. Now, I've gone for 11:36. I know he arrived at the palace at around 11:07 on October the 25th, 2022. I don't know. It may be, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes out, but The Guardian had this 11:36, was suggesting it's something that it kind of hinted at the fact that 11:36 a.m. was the time to go for. But if it's a different time, that's it's not going to make a huge difference to the chart. Now, what is concerning about Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister is it happened just before a new moon, 10 minutes, 15 minutes before a new moon. That's not ideal, because the moon was waning. You don't want to get, the moon was waning. If he'd become Prime Minister half an hour later, it would have been better. It was waning. We were on a dying cycle. I suppose you could say that that's like the dying cycle of the Conservative Party. There was an article in The Guardian, I think by, Andrew Rawnsley, and he was saying that, talking about Conservative leaders, he was talking about prime ministers in general. But when you've got a prime minister coming in at the end, when his party has been in government for a long time, remember the Tories have been in government since I think 2010. When that leader comes in right at the end, it usually doesn't work out very well. And so that kind of fits, the symbolism fits quite well, him becoming Prime Minister just before the new moon. That he's becoming Prime Minister just as his own party has reached the end of its cycle. So that is not great. But, it's not any new moon. It's a new moon in early Scorpio. The moon is in an absolutely terrible position in his in this I don't know if it's swearing in, when he becomes when he's appointed Prime Minister by the King. It is in Scorpio. It's in it's fallen in Scorpio, number one. It is in the Via Combusta, the flaming path between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. It is close to 3 degrees Scorpio, which is the worst place for the moon. It's a degree of maximum fall, and it's a new moon. In other words, the moon is right next to the sun, so it's burnt out by the sun. So the moon is in a terrible position, diabolical position. the moon, you could say, is the public, how he relates to the public. It's bad. And, there are other things going on, but I mean, they're not such a big issue. You go, okay, there's a Saturn-Uranus square. Says Mars is in the 7th. I mean, regardless if I got the time a bit wrong, there's definitely Sagittarius rising when he became Prime Minister. And so Mars in the 7th, Britain's enemies, I suppose. Britain is obsessed with fighting this war in Ukraine. It's I don't know what it is about Britain. Check out Kipling, Rudyard Kipling. He wrote this book called Kim. It was like 19th century, the great. They were obsessed about Russians in the 19th century in Kim. It's a great book, Kim. It's all about Russian agents in India, and I suppose it must have had some. Maybe it's that great game, the stuff in the 19th century seems to have had some impact on the British psyche. Anyway, there's that Mars in the 7th, Britain's enemies, and this Mars is square Neptune, so. Maybe this hints at the fact that, Britain involved in a conflict and it hasn't got a clue what it's doing, really. Maybe. But so overall, it's the chart for when he became Prime Minister is really bad. And I think that it does suggest that it's really is the last gasp. But, everyone knows that. I mean, everyone thinks that. You don't have to be an astrologer to say that. I mean, a non-astrologer would say, yeah, well, that's obvious. You've just been reading the newspapers. But, I don't have a time of birth for Rishi Sunak. I'm not really saying anything for sure. But, yeah, I just think that new moon, that chart for him becoming Prime Minister does hint at the fact that... It's all moving towards the end game as far as the Tories are concerned. But as I said, I'm probably stating the obvious. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. Thank you for listening. And I will talk to you tomorrow.